Well, folks, we have a really big review this time. So many cards got revealed in the last 24 hours, including some freshly revealed Hunter cards like this new legendary weapon, the Hope of Quel'th the Loss, a 6-mana weapon for Hunter. It's a 4/2, and it reads, after your hero attacks, give your minions +1/+1 wherever they are. So that means on board. So if you have a board ready to go with Hope of Quel'th the Loss, this is going to give it a nice little buff. That means in hand, of course, this is a little bit of a hand buff, and obviously in deck as well. And we've seen a few of these buffs now, these like wherever they are type buffs, like Invigorating Sermon in Paladin, the 4-mana spell that does the same thing. And they're okay. They're not the most amazing payoffs. I think often you'd rather have a bigger buff in a single direction, like you'd rather just buff your board for more, or you'd rather buff your hand for more, or rather buff your deck for more, like Lorthamar Theron's doubling your deck for 7 mana, right? So sometimes the fact that this is split across all 3 elements instead of really focusing in on one can be to its detriment, particularly because for hand buffs and deck buffs, it can take a really long time to pay those off. Like, yes, of course, this is +2/+2 across both attacks, but all of that's on a pretty significant delay. And particularly by the time you get to 6 mana, is a deck buff going to be relevant enough if it's only +2/+2? I mean, you're getting so late in the game where stats have a smaller and smaller impact, and only +2/+2 doesn't really feel all that significant. And the same thing for hand buffs. Like, you'd rather have your hand buffs, those stats getting into play in the mid game as opposed to getting into play into the late game, which, you know, if you've attacked with Hope of Quel'th the Loss on 6, you're probably going to attack again on 7, and that's the first time the stats, at least from hand or deck, are really going to start impacting. And, you know, as far as finishers are concerned, if you're trying to build out a board and then buff it, I'm sure there are better finishers as well than just a meager +1/+1 buff on any given turn. So all in all, this card does a lot in total, in aggregate, but I don't know if it does enough in each specific scenario to actually warrant it. And coming down at 6 mana, man, that is pretty late in the game for a lot of these buffs to start stacking up. Now we're seeing a little bit of an introduction with the rest of the cards in this video of an attack hunter with some like attack synergies where you're going to want to be attacking a lot. And in particular, if you're attacking a lot, often that wants to go face and do damage. And this is playing for a little bit of a longer term game plan. Because again, if you're buffing hand and deck, you're probably hoping for those buffs to stack up over multiple turns. You're not really looking to end the game while also buffing stuff that's not even in play. So there's this weird, like, I'm trying to make the game last longer to get value out of this card. And in fact, that's going to be a little bit true for the other two as well, I think. Like, I'm extending the length of the game, but I'm a hunter, and these cards are like encouraging me to go face a lot with my attacks. There's this kind of clunkiness inherent to all of this that's really making it feel iffy to me. This just does not feel like a prototypical hunter archetype sort of card. And it feels like the payoff is really late for a deck that doesn't have traditionally a ton of survivability. Or if it is going late, like Beast Hunter has done, you know, it's creating these monster high pressure scenarios late in the game, you know. And this is more of a trickle than a waterfall. And I don't know if that's really what Hunter's strengths are. So let's talk about one of these attack synergy cards here. This is the Shock Spitter, a new 2-mana 2/2 beast. Battlecry, deal 1 damage, and this is improved by your hero attacks this game. So pretty potentially scary Battlecry here if you're attacking a lot. And we should look at weapons in Hunter, by the way. These are the standard format weapons plus the new legendary. Of course, it just got revealed. Harpoon Gun, we know that's a great card. Bloodseeker has some potential, especially if you're honorably killing it reliably. That could be a way to get a lot of attacks in. Candle Shot, you know, is a nice 3 durability. Get it down early, start pumping up your Shock Spitter. We're going to see one other card here. I'll just go ahead and tease it. The Keen Eye Spotter in particular plays nicely with Candle Shot, I think, here, providing you some removal utility. So all in all, you know, the ability to stack this up into a really powerful battle cry. I think at the mid game, this could easily be 3-4 damage pretty reliably. Just ping off a minion if you need to. And then if you wanted to save this for a really long-term game plan, is it possible to get this up to 8, 9, 10 damage? Yeah, it's not crazy if you're running enough weapons. And if the weapons are going face a lot in particular, this could create some nice lethal potential, just stacking up a ton of face damage. Now, interestingly, I don't really think that you're playing Hope of Quel'th the Loss in that environment, I think you're probably just like playing a more smork game plan and hitting face as often as you can, and then hoping that these shock spitters get you there on damage in combination with other lethal hunter cards. So for me, the shock spitter actually seems to have a lot more potential in and of itself in a more just like I'm attacking face a lot deck that Hope of Quel'Thalas doesn't really play all that well to. I don't think these necessarily go together, even though they're both attack things. The Hope of Quel'Thalas is more like, you know, I want to run a lot of minions and rush minions, and like, you know, it's a little more late game oriented. This can be played late, but you're trying to end the game as opposed to stretch it out, right? You're wanting to stretch a game out with Quel'Thalas. You're wanting to end it with Shock Spitter. So they do feel a little bit at odds with one another, despite being in the same kind of synergy bucket here. But Shock Spitter has such high potential that you don't need a ton of weapons to make this good, and I think that makes this a pretty scary card. Now, the Keen Eye Spotter is a little more nuanced here in its value, I'd say. This is a 3-mana 3/4. Whenever your hero attacks a minion, set its health to 1. So this basically allows any weapon swing, really, to become a removal card. In particular, Candle Shot looks like a really nice combo with this, because you're not going to take any damage and you're going to be able to remove that stuff. So this is kind of like a Hunter's Mark on a stick, but specific to attacks. So if you're looking to play for a longer term game plan, stretch games out a little bit, the Keen Eye Spotter might give you some of that removal, using your weapons just to keep the board in check, giving a little bit of a swing potential. Now, that said, this is conditional if you don't have a weapon equipped, or if the attack feels weird, if you're taking too much damage over time with all these attacks into minions. Like, man, this is going to feel a little bit awkward, and it's kind of a heavy overhead at 3 mana here to pay just to remove something and get a 3/4 that, you know, you might want 2 or 3 hits out of this to really make it feel worth it, and I think that's unlikely to happen. Usually the opponent's going to deal with this if they're trying to play for a tempo swing. This thing's not going to stick around forever. So all in all, I don't know, this just feels awkward to me. It doesn't really do what Hunter wants to do, which is often go face, create pressure, create outs. This kind of shifts them into more of a defensive and reactive game plan, and it's kind of a 2-part removal at that, and I just don't think this really lines up as well with Hunter for me. This card might end up being rather awkward and expensive for Hunter removal. So our final Hunter card here is Scourge Tamer. This one got leaked a little while ago, but he is a 2-mana 2/2 undead battlecry. Craft a custom Zombeast. So we're getting Deathstalker Rexar's effect back here in a card. So, you know, you can get a couple of these, I guess, in your deck instead of having them on an endless hero power like you got for Rexar. And I gotta say, that's really a downside here. This is fine. Getting a Zombeast is pretty solid. They're generally above average cards. I think there will be some decks, especially like Renathal decks, that are more than willing to toss in a Scourge Tamer and just have that 2-mana play, get a nice Zombeast for later. That's going to be totally fine. Just, we've had these kind of stopgap cards. Play a little thing and get the thing for later. That certainly has some precedence as a model for cards that works well in Hearthstone. I don't think anybody's going to be over the moon for this. I mean, if you look at the Zombeast pool, it's really hard to detect exactly what's going to be good. And of course, that changes pretty rapidly over time. There's a little bit less life gain, perhaps, than things like Rexar would have enjoyed back in the day. But also, you may not care as much about that. That was more of a grinded out sort of game plan. You just wanted a Zombeast till the end of days to live forever. And with this one, it's probably going to be more about like gaining a little bit of tempo or just finding a good mana filler. So I'm not sure that'll hold it back that much. So ultimately, this card looks fine. It's absolutely playable, just not gonna be anybody's like, you know, star card in their deck. It's just a card that'll get tossed in from time to time, and it's cool that those exist because this will be a lot of fun, I think, to play. So next up here, we've got a bunch of Priest cards, basically like the almost entire set for Priest got revealed. We'll kick it off here with the legendary. This is High Cultist Basilief, a 5-mana 3/5 battlecry resurrect all friendly undead that died after your last turn. So I think a couple ways to use this card ideally, I guess, given all the other undead and more aggressive undead stuff we're going to see revealed in this video. Use case number 1 is probably in a more aggressive board-based early game swarm style undead deck where you're playing a lot of undead stuff early, hoping to have some kind of decent board developed into turn 4. And then if your opponent clears that board on turn 4, or if they let you trade in your board on turn 5, in either case, you could play High Cultist Basilief on 5 and then reload that board back up and get another big high pressure board state. Just try again, basically. Make them clear it a second time, and you're getting a 3/5 as a bonus there. And then the other use case for Basilief might actually be with things like bigger undead units. If you think about, say, like an Undying Disciple, the 6-mana 3/7 taunt with the Death Rattle that does an AoE based on its attack, that could just be a really good play for Basilisk. Like, that dies, you play it down, your opponent kills it, they get their board wiped, it's dead, it's in the pool for Basilisk, and you just get another one. You get another great unit with a 3/5 basically for free. In other words, this doesn't have to be like a wide board synergy sort of thing. It could be a way to just get extra copies of key undead units. There's a little bit of risk there because you know, a deck's gonna have to have enough undead to make it worth it. Otherwise, Basilisk could just be kind of sitting dead in hand for a while instead of undead on board. So, you know, maybe not even perfect there, but you could imagine some really big high payoff undead that do make Basilisk worth it just as a way to get that extra copy. So of those two use cases, I think the like kind of swarm early undead package is actually going to be a little bit harder to pull off. It's compared to other things like Rafam, for instance, as you know, this swarm payoff card, Basilisk is just like a fraction of Rafam's power because he's a bigger base body. He always works. He's just going to summon the imps. In this case, you know, they have to have died the turn before for Basilisk to make sense. So sometimes you just don't have good board states leading into turn 4. You might get like one minion off Basilisk that's small, and that's certainly not going to feel worth it. Whereas Rafam is always bringing the boys with him. Rafam has the buffs. It can be used as like a follow-up card. He can just deal extra damage if you already had the board, and he's infused for that +2/+2 buff. And he only costs 1 more for all of those additional crazy upsides. So I just don't think this really feels comparable to some of the other things that have worked in Hearthstone for this like wide board swarm follow-up payoff legendary card. It doesn't seem worth it to me in that regard. But I think there's a more fringe chance this gets some played with, you know, just bigger resurrect effects. Because if you get one really awesome big thing out of this, it's probably still going to feel pretty nifty from time to time. So, you know, I'm not as convinced of the undead swarm stuff in general we're going to talk about in this video, but I'm not totally writing Basilisk off as a card. I think there is that small chance. So next up here we have Mind Eater, a 2-mana 3/2 undead. Death Rattle, add a copy of a card in your opponent's deck to your hand. So pretty basic stats on board here. You're not really getting a lot of tempo out of this one, but you are getting a little bit of value pass back basically with this Thought Steal style effect, which could be a good way to fuse these undead cards with the Thief package for Priest. Certainly I don't think there's enough undead stuff here to be a deck all on its own. I think in a lot of ways some of these play better towards maybe an aggressive shadow deck being fused with them, but Mind Eater here actually points more towards a Thief deck being fused. I mean, if you're running a Thief deck, you might toss this in anyway, even if you don't have undead synergies, just because it's a way to reliably get some tempo rolling while also still playing towards your copy and thievery style game plans. So this card kind of has a little bit more flexibility than most. That said, this is still not really that high of an output card. It's a pretty basic stat line, and the Death Rattle here means that your copying effect is delayed, so it's not like, for instance, it's going to get you a resource right away that might be useful. It's really more about that setup. So it doesn't really stand out as anything crazy powerful. It's just a little bit flexible. So next up here we have Haunting Nightmare, new 3-mana 3/3 undead for Priest. Death Rattle, haunt a card in your hand. When you play it, summon a 3/3 soldier, and notably the soldier is not undead, so this doesn't actually contribute to like a chain of sticky undead minions laying around. Really only the Nightmare itself here is undead. And yeah, I mean, 2 3/3s for 3 mana is great. We've seen that work, but the big issue here is the delay on the second 3/3 is really going to hold this card back, I think, because basically if it hits a high cost card, it's going to be a long time before you're actually able to play it. Or even if it just hits a card that's not ideal to be played for a turn or two, it's like, well, this isn't really fitting my curve, or this is a more reactive card and I'm trying to play for tempo right now. It's just not going to feel like it stacks up to all that much upside. There is some neat idea if you get like a bunch of these going off and you like Zyrella the Death Rattles and you just get like this endless swarm of 3/3s or something. That's kind of a fun idea, but ultimately still really delayed. And I don't think you're happy to just play the flat 3/3 that pays off so far along. It's going to take a lot more work and mana expenditure to get that 3/3 down. And it's not an undead, so I don't even think it plays the undead swarms. So I don't know, this card just looks a little clunky and awkward to me. I think it's not really a tempo card and it's not really a value card. So either way you try to slice this undead stuff for Priest, I'm not sure the Haunting Nightmare really feels like a great part of it. So next up here we have the Bone Caller, a 4-mana 2/4 taunt with Death Rattle, resurrect a friendly undead that died this game. So of course, if you're playing this like on curve on 4, in a more tempo-y undead deck, you're probably looking at like a Mind Eater or a Haunting Nightmare here, which means you've got a 2/4 that's resurrecting into, you know, a 3 attack minion. That's not great in my book. I mean, that's really about the same as like a piloted shredder, perhaps, if you're playing this in a tempo deck. Now, theoretically, of course, if you are, again, running like big undead stuff and you're playing this later in a game, that might be a little bit more annoying. Like if this is a taunt that rolls into an Undying Disciple, suddenly that's a super high friction scenario. So this is coming down on like 7 or 8. Bonecaller might be a lot more interesting. I guess you have to ask, is he more interesting than other big late game plays that Priest might have access to? And are they willing to run this as a 4-cost card that doesn't feel very good to play on turn 4? That's a big hesitation. Often you want your cards to have that sort of dual use case where they're both good early and good late. And I think Bonecaller in those scenarios is probably only good late. And I'm not really loving this card early. And if you're playing a more aggressive-y, tempo-y undead priest that's trying to get those swarms out, I'm not loving the 2/4 here because it's not creating a lot of pressure. Sometimes the taunt stuff can create friction, making it a little bit awkward for your opponent. But also, if this is your turn 4 play and you're just leaving this out on board, okay, they might just ignore it. And then that means your turn 5 is stranded with High Cultist Basilisk because this guy's not even an undead himself and your undead's kind of tucked away. So there's this awkward kind of natural curve even within these first 4 undead synergy cards we've seen. They don't even necessarily play all that well together or cleanly. So I guess yet again, the Bonecaller just feels awkward to me. I'm not seeing how this comes together, and none of these cards feel like pushed enough from a stat standpoint or an effect standpoint that they're just lining up in my brain. I think they all seem just a little clunky and a little slow. So now let's move over to the spells for Priest, which the spells actually make all of this look a little bit better. The problem is they're sort of inherently tied to the minion package. So even though the spells make more sense, are they good enough to shore up the weaknesses of the minions? I don't think so, but let's talk about it. Undying Allies here. This is maybe the most exciting of them all. A new 0-mana shadow spell. After you play an undead this turn, give it Reborn. So this is basically a way to apply a lot of the extra stickiness to your undead minions that might make them feel worth it into something like your Basilisk, right? Like the stickier the board is leading into a Basilisk turn, the better. Of course, that also just helps ensure that you're staying ahead on board. So, you know, ideally, I think with Undying Allies, you really want to be playing like 2 minions with this or more. For 1 minion, it's not bad, but, you know, the cost of a card to like get an extra 3/1 with Death Rattle, you maybe don't feel great about that. You're probably looking to kind of blow up all at once with this to build a really high value Undying Allies. I don't know that one minion's going to feel worth it in most cases. And the minions you're hitting for Priests in particular, they don't really feel that exciting either. They're not like doubling up on tempo. This is the only thing offering them that extra immediate tempo. So it's kind of like you're going all in on your hand. And of course, if you're playing a bunch of small stuff and then you're playing 0-mana cards, you're going to run out of resources really quickly. Yes, Mind Eater will help you reload those resources, but with your opponent's stuff that may not fit your game plan at all, that might be totally useless to you. So I don't think that really aligns well with going for a really aggressive minion-based opener on the back of Undying Allies. So, you know, yes, if you're on turn 7 and you're playing this with 4 minions or something, that's insane. But how are you getting there? Are you feeling like you have to use this earlier in the game? Are you only getting 1 minion out of it? Is the minion that you're hitting actually going to be that useful to help you win the board? Those are all the questions I have for this. Now, again, though, I actually think this is way more exciting with like a big, crazy Death Rattle effect. Sometimes hitting this on, you know, a 6-drop, an 8-drop or something is actually going to be more useful than hitting 3 or 4 early game cards. So this is one of those where I'm not sure how many decks are actually going to end up running this. It would be hard for a deck running late game cards to run this, but off of Discover effects, randomly stumbling into this card, I think this is actually going to land and feel like a pretty powerful card rather often. Just giving some big awesome thing Reborn might be nice to get you know, extra hits on those sorts of death rattles. So will this be used in a Swarm Undead aggro deck? I don't think this is a good enough card to enable the rest of the weaker cards here. It is a very good card, of course, like it has a high power output, but it's reliant on this undead tag. It's only working with undead, which means it's beholden to the strength of the rest of the package. It's beholden to the strength of the deck. and I don't see the deck getting there on the back of this one. So in other words, it's not enough to drive the power level by itself, and therefore it's kind of pulled down a little bit by its peers, despite otherwise looking like a really high output card. So next up here we have Grave Digging, another more intriguing spell card for this undead stuff. 4 mana shadow spell, draw 2 cards, and it costs 1 if a friendly undead died after your last turn. Not 1 less, but 1 total. So that's a 1 mana draw 2 in a scenario where an undead has died. And needless to say, 1 mana draw 2, like, that's awesome. And in fact, maybe good enough card draw that other decks find ways to use this. Even if you're not committing to a full undead swarm, but you just have a few key undead here and there that are a great fit for your deck. Otherwise, I keep going back to Undying Disciple because it's such an obvious example. Again, that's a great example. Just having that 1 mana draw 2, that might feel really nice. I think Grave Digging just has enough efficiency and output there that it's going to be a relevant card in some decks. And of course, if an Undead Swarm deck does get there, this will be a really powerful way to keep resources flowing in a deck that otherwise might run out of cards pretty quickly. So this is a really solid card. Once again, the spells here look much better than the minions to me, and this probably has a handful of different homes that it could survive in. So next up here is Animate Dead, a 1 mana shadow spell that will resurrect a friendly minion that costs 3 or less. So getting a 3-drop for 1 mana is pretty dang good, and in fact, getting some key minions for 1 mana can be really nice because you can get extra copies here of really nice build around cards or really key things. Think about things like Radiant Elementals, for instance. Playing a Radiant Elemental on 2, not caring whether or not it dies, and then having a turn later in the game, or you're resurrecting specifically that card for some kind of pop-off or crazy turn, or the same thing with a Nazmani Blood Weaver, right? There are a few different sort of minions like that for priests historically that have done really well, and having a way to get extra copies of those on demand, as long as your deck is built for it, is really powerful. So I think this could both be solid in a deck that's playing a lot of early minions and just wants cheap ways to potentially bring back significant stuff, whether that's undead or death rattle. Otherwise, Animate Dead could be great in a tempo deck, but could also be great in some of those cheesy decks with Radiant Elementals and so on. This seems like a very powerful tool in either case and looks like a really good card to me. So our final card here for Priest is Shadow Word Undeath, a 5 mana shadow spell. Deal 2 damage to all enemies, that's both face and minions, so a consecration at a base, and if a friendly undead died after your last turn, deal 2 more. So for any decks that have a splash of undead here, yeah, this looks like a really solid option to me. It's a great board clear that's also hitting for face. So if there's any sort of aggressively minded deck that cares about damage, that has undead, sure, this is a great fit, but also sometimes you just need enough board clears, and if you're running undead, this might feel like one of the more efficient, reliable options for you. So this will not, I'm sure, be in every priest deck, because not every priest deck will care about undead or have enough to matter, but for those that do, this certainly looks like a viable option. So moving over here to Rogue, we've got the Scourge Illusionist, a new 4 mana 4/4 undead. Death Rattle at a 4/4 copy of another Death Rattle minion in your deck to your hand. It costs 4 less. So do keep in mind the wording there, another Death Rattle minion. That means it won't be another Scourge Illusionist where you can just kind of like create chains of these, but still a really significant discount there at 4 mana. So you could put some really big stuff in your deck with a nice giant Death Rattle and then get it discounted a ton. There are already some examples of big death rattles that Rogue has been trying to cheese out with cards like Smoke Screen, for instance, and this just adds to the fuel there, I think, for a death rattle Rogue deck. And we're going to see another card as well that plays really nicely with death rattles as well. And the nice thing here with the Scourge Illusionist is you're still getting a body while setting all this up, so you're getting some early things to do. You're not totally sacrificing your early game. You're playing stuff, you're getting stats down, and then you're setting up for those enormous swings later in the game. So all of this seems to play really rather nicely here into a Death Rattle Rogue deck. I feel like that's been teetering on the verge of success. We've had Death Rattle Rogue stuff with naval mines blowing people up. That's worked well, but the bigger Death Rattle Rogue stuff has been teetering on the verge of success for a while now. And I think with the 2 cards we're going to see in this video, I have a feeling it's going to get there. I think both of these add enough to tip that over into some successful territory. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if Death Rattle Rogue becomes one of those like tier 2, tier 3 decks on the back of Scourge Illusionist here, putting in some extra work. So the other card we mentioned here was the Rotten Rodent, a 2-mana 2/1 undead beast. With Battlecry, reduce the cost of all death rattle cards in your deck by 1. And yeah, that's another significant way to help cheat out these bigger death rattle cards a little bit sooner. You could occasionally even hit the dream here of the Rotten Rodent on 2 into a freshly discounted Scourge Illusionist top decked on turn 3 for a monster line. But also, this is just, this could easily be 5-10 mana saved over the course of a game. It's not going to come in big, significant chunks, but sometimes these big, crazy death rattle cards, getting them down 1 turn sooner can definitely make the difference between winning or losing and stabilizing or not. And again, this is just a nice card to kind of throw down, get things rolling, get some cards in play while still advancing your overall game plan for later with the big death rattle. So I actually like the Rotten Rodent, and between these two, I think this deck is going to come together pretty nicely, and I am very excited to try it indeed. So next up for Rogue, we have the Noxious Infiltrator, a 4-mana 2/5. He's got Poisonous, and Battlecry of a friendly undead died after your last turn, deal 1 damage to a minion. So of course, with Poisonous, that 1 damage becomes an assassinate effect, essentially, as long as they don't have Divine Shield, I guess, which means this can be a pretty swingy card for 4 mana. That said, of course, there is this condition specifically that an undead had to die on your opponent's turn or on yours. I think that's actually going to be a little bit harder to pull off for Rogue than most people are realizing. Number one, we don't have a really clean undead deck lining up for Rogue. There's not a lot of undead synergy stuff. It's more like Death Rattle, and we're going to see the concoction stuff for Rogue eventually. They got leaked a little bit during the Death Knight event. That's more spell based and not quite as undead focused. There are some undead cards, but not really about being an undead deck or having a reliably sticky undead line. So the issue is with a removal card like this, right? Removal cards have to work at specific moments. It's not like there's always going to be a great moment for your 4-mana removal card. There will often be times where it's fine if you just want to hit a 3/3 or something. But if you want to hit the big thing, the scary thing, the key swing you're looking for with a removal card like this, it has to be in specific moments. It's like, okay, they're going to play an 8/8. I need to have the Noxious Infiltrator ready then. But is it going to line up for the undead trigger here? Do you have the condition met when you need it to be met to make the Infiltrator as swingy as possible? Or is it just going to be okay a lot of the other times? If this card's just okay, that's not good enough to run in a deck, because this is not a synergy card. This is not driving towards a game plan. It's kind of a filler reactive card. So I think the fact that this is only going to work in certain moments, and those won't always be the moments that you need it, is really going to hold back the Noxious Infiltrator. Despite this otherwise looking like a really efficient swingy removal card, I suspect it'll be a lot clunkier than people realize, and that's probably going to mean it gets left out of a lot of decks. So next up for Demon Hunter here, we have some no minion Demon Hunter cards. Remember we saw one revealed very, very early in the expansion. You might have forgotten this. Let's just pull it up real quick. So people can see it. Deal with a Devil, the 5-mana Fell spell, summon 2/3/3 Fell Fiends with lifesteal. If your deck has no minions, summon another. So that's 3/3/3s if you have no minions. And we're getting some more no minion support for Demon Hunter here with Soul Eater's Scythe, a new 4-mana 4/2. Start of game, consume 3 different minions in your deck, leave behind souls that discover them. The souls are 1-mana spells that allow you to discover one of the 3 minions that have been consumed. Once the minion is discovered, it is taken out of the pool, so you can't get 3 copies of the same minion. I thought that might be the case, which would be crazy good, but in fact, no, you're just going to get those 3, and it costs a little bit of a tax, that 1 mana, to actually grab them when you want them. But of course, what that allows you to do is run minions in your no minion deck. So for instance, you can put things like Jace Darkweaver or Artificer Zymox in your deck without breaking your no minion synergy cards, of which we're going to see a couple more in this video, which is a pretty neat idea. So you can run all your relic cards, and you can still have Zymox, and you can have these no minion cards, and you can run a Fell package, and you can still have Jace as a payoff, which is pretty cool way to give you those rewards for your big synergies without breaking your no minion synergies along the way. And the fact that this is start of game is what makes that possible. If you're thinking about shenanigans with Cthulhu the Shattered, it's already been confirmed that won't work. Cthulhu breaks apart before the Soul Eater Scythe, so sorry to break your heart there. But on top of that, this is just a 4/2 weapon, which certainly that's fine. Nothing really exciting there. You care more about the effect on this one than anything else. Now, of course, this makes sense for a no minion deck like we talked about. Some kind of Fel Relic no minion deck, that's a thing. You could even run Renathal on that deck as well, by the way. And he would not mess things up because he would be just one of the things you discovered. But there's actually another use case for this card that is not a no minion deck. This is actually sort of a tutor, because if you're only running 3 minions, right, and you have a really specific thing you're trying to find, right? Zymox is a fine example, or Jace is a fine example, whatever. If you're looking for a really specific minion and you want to find it as soon as possible, what you can actually do is use Soul Eater Scythe to triple your odds of finding that key card, because you now have 3 souls in the deck instead of just the 1 minion, and any one of the souls can always be the one that discovers the card you care about first. So I wouldn't be totally shocked if this showed up in some decks just as a way to triple your odds of finding some kind of combo card or build around card as well. It doesn't just have to be limited to a no minion deck, which I think is a pretty nifty extra use case for this one. And all of that on a 4-2 weapon. A 4-2 weapon's totally fine. Of course, Demon Hunter can run a 4-2 weapon with no problems when you've got this additional extra upside. So pretty nifty card here. Really, really like this design a lot. So as for the no minion support cards here, we've got the Felderai Warband, a 4-mana spell. It deals 4 damage, and if your deck has no minions, you summon 4 1/1 Illidari with Rush. So yeah, I mean, this is a great mid-game swing kind of card. You know, kill off a minion of your opponents and get some 1/1s. If you need to clean up the math a little bit, they allow you to do that, or they just allow you to develop some stuff. Often in no minion decks, you're looking for ways to make minions that aren't minions, and this is certainly a way to make minions without actually having to run minions, and also has, of course, some token synergies, of which Demon Hunter still has quite a few payoffs for token cards lingering about. So this does indeed look rather efficient. The question I guess you have to ask is this card and the card we're about to see, are they really enough? And the 5-drop card that we saw earlier, the originally revealed one, are they good enough to encourage this game plan? Because yes, that you can do it, and yes, the cards look solid, but are they good enough to make you want to be a no minion deck? Like, are they worth the sacrifice? I don't think this is good enough to be worth the sacrifice. And I don't think the 5-mana spell we looked at either is good enough to be worth the sacrifice. I don't actually even think that card's that great when it pays off. I don't think getting 3/3/3s is really all that significant. So I don't think they're worth it yet. And we're going to look at one more card. This is Mark of Scorn, a 2-mana spell. Draw a card. If it's not a minion, deal 3 damage to the lowest health enemy. So this is a little bit of card cycle, a little bit of removal. Sometimes it can actually be face damage as well. This is not a Fel spell. Keep in mind, neither is the last one, so no synergies on these two with Jace or anything. But yeah, again, this just kind of looks fine. Now, this doesn't demand you have no minions. It's just, you know, if you hit a non-minion, you're going to get that damage. So, you know, if your deck has very few minions, this might still be worth running, just because, you know, you're going to hit it 90% of the time or something anyway. But in a no-minion deck, of course, it's going to be guaranteed. But again, it's not very insane. It's kind of like I don't know, a Chaos Strike almost, a 2-mana cycle that gives you a little bit of damage. I mean, you know, it's a little better than Chaos Strike in some ways because you don't have to like take damage if you're trading into something, but in other ways it's worse because it's not a Fel spell, and it may not always hit the thing you care most about, whereas you could control where Chaos Strike goes. So it's like, this card's fine, it's just not great, and it's not pushing the archetype. It's no reason to run a no minion deck. So that's kind of how I feel about both of these. These are okay, but they're not an incentive to totally warp your deck around them. They're not such payoffs. This is going to need more support in future expansions if these cards are ever going to get there, because as it stands right now, these are not the payoff cards we're looking for. I think Soul Eater Scythe, again, is a pretty cool card anyway. There are some use cases for this, and, you know, it's a great setup for this, but, man, I don't know. It's just not a great reason to run no minions at the moment. It's going to need some help. Hope of Quel'Tha Loss is a 2-star card. Shock Spitter is a 4-star card. Keen Eye Spotter is a 2-star card. Scourge Tamer is a 3-star card. High Cultist Basileff is a 3-star card. Undying Allies is a 3-star card. Mind Eater is a 2-star card. Haunting Nightmare is a 2-star card. Bone Caller is a 2-star card. Grave Digging is a 4-star card. Shadow Word Undeath is a 3-star card. Animate Dead is a 4-star card. Scourge Illusionist is a 4-star card. Rotten Rodent is a 4-star card. Noxious Infiltrator is a 3-star card. Soul Eater Scythe is a 4-star card. Felderai Warband is a 3-star card. Mark of Scorn is a 2-star card. So yeah, folks, man, we had so many freaking cards in this video. One of the longest reviews I've done in a while. Let me know what you think about all these. What's going to get there? What's not? Is Hope of Quel'Thalas actually the nuts? Tell me that in the comments below. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.